Good morning, good morning. This is Dr. Debra Dupree and your interactive meeting facilitator. And I'm absolutely delighted to have Felicia Amenta join us here today. And I'm going to wait a few minutes before we start. We will be recording so that it can be available to people afterwards. And we still have people joining us, so welcome. I imagine quite a few of you may have been on the program that Felicia just hosted at 9 o'clock on an update on, I'm getting confused with all these numbers, 685?
Yes, AB 685. Yeah. It is confusing. SB 1159 and AB 685, which are completely different and have different effective dates. And yes, the governor didn't make it easy for us.
Yes, yeah. And now, and I do a lot around the sexual harassment and bullying stuff. So I get, AB, what was that one again? 1825 and 20. So yeah, it gets a little confusing with all the different numbers for sure. Yeah. Well, I just want to say hi to Kathy, Christina, Lori, Debra, Emma, Melissa, and I'm going to ask you all to just, real quickly, put your video on, put your sound on, let's say hi. And I know I see some of you in my interactive meetings, and there we are. Hey.
Hi, Christina. Hi, Kathy.
Hi, Kathy. Got it. Okay, thank you so much for joining us. We've been doing this about once a month because particularly under COVID, things just keep happening, right? And so we this is a little bit different than Felicia's, semi-annual program in the sense of want it to be a little bit interactive, but just to get to know each other, answer your questions. We do have some key topics that we'll be doing. And so again, welcome to everyone. Again, Dr. Debra Dupree and with Felicia Amenta. So our Monday Q&A. So let me share with you the things that we want to cover today. And first of all, when we started planning out for today's program, it was like, okay, what's new is happening at the County Office of Education, first of all. So Felicia will provide some information about a special program coming up. We've had a tumultuous kind of couple of weeks with the post-election results, and so concern about how that was playing out in the workplace. And along with that, increased employee stress and anxiety. And certainly Mark addressed that in the last program too, about the increase in psychiatric claims that are being experienced. And how that plays into COVID-19 protocols and some of the underlying conditions that I've been dealing with in the IPMs. And then also, what steps can employers take to mitigate the effects of these external events, using our existing known resources and processes. And then the mandatory testing that's already in effect, I guess. And so Felicia will update on that as well. And also let me share from my experience with some of the interactive process meetings that I've been facilitating, any insights and information I've gained that may help the rest of you, okay? So again, welcome. And so Felicia, I guess, what would you say is the most burning issue that you're being presented with right now?
I would say, right now today, coming off of the presentation that we just did on AB 685, I think I had got 100 emails after that presentation asking for the tools, right, that are needed, because I do have some sample letters and some samples of the kinds of things you can attach and what they look like. And I am happy to, I did not write these samples, they came from other law firms and other professionals, but they are a good starting point. Of course, have to be customized to work with each individual school district, but I am happy to provide those because I think that's really going to help with the notifications. I think the governor put the 2 laws out in September, but one of them was effective immediately. So we really focused on that one, on SB 1159. So I think that's top of mind right now. And then of course, there was a lot of post-election stress that was going on with our employees. We've seen a big rise in mental health counseling with the program that I manage, EASE, through our vendor MHN, who's been doing a really excellent job. It's not only our employees accessing getting the 6 free counseling sessions, it's also their loved ones and their family. Anyone that lives in their household can access those 6 free counseling sessions. And we've been seeing a big rise in family members and specifically adolescents and young adults having a really hard time with COVID. And then I think that the county office really is pretty proactive with their employees, and because of all the stress that was going on with the election, and then the stress that was going on with the social unrest, the county did some groups looking at that, and then we all are having mandatory equity and diversity training. And I have to say, I've been through the first 2 sessions of that training. We all are required to have 8 hours of diversity and equity training by Dr. Gotthold, and I have to say that in my view it's been marvelous. It is mandatory for all employees at the county, so it's not an optional training. But there are some difficult discussions that happen in that training, so I have to say it's not an easy or a normal thing, because we talk about some different social and racial issues in context with the equity leaders. So those are some of the things going on at the county. And then of course, a lot of our district members are already rolling out the 50% of employees that have to be tested every other month. The county is rolling that out now. And of course, I am part of that program, just like all of our staff that come on to campuses at all, even if it's for 15 minutes. If you walk onto any campus at the county office, you're included in that testing module. And then we're organizing it by cohorts. And then, so I'm cohort 4. And so you have your cohorts, and then you're tested every, on a schedule every other month with your cohorts. So those are just some of the things that are happening right now. Some COVID related, some related to stressors that are going on in the world today.
Yeah. I would like to go back to what you're talking about with the diversity and equity training, because I actually been involved in that arena since like 1999. And I've done a lot of training for organizations, worked with an HR company out of Miami. So worked with some pretty big organizations. And and things, I saw things improve so much, over the, last 20 years, that I have to say, myself and many people who've been in the diversity field for quite a long time, we're pretty shocked, actually. I mean, it's like we knew that there was still some, stuff going on there, just like with the gender pay and, the last kind of thing, but it was like, well, it's so much better, but, the whole BLM movement and what happened back in May and over the summer, really demonstrated just, how deep, some of the biases are that exist. And I know I've been encouraging in my different podcasts and classes I teach at Cal State, we need to learn how to have those more difficult conversations. We need to, raise these issues and be able to have, good, frank conversations. We work with people we work with day to day. So I know that's where some of my other kind of work has been focused on, is facilitating those kinds of conversations. And yeah, so it's been appreciated, but it is challenging, just like you mentioned. Yeah. So is that a program required for just the county office, or is that? That
is a program that that's Dr. Gotthold leading. He feels that this is top of mind, and so that's why the equity and diversity training is mandatory for all employees at the county office. And we've all been already started. I think I've had 2 sessions of it, and we have some more scheduled. So obviously it's not, we're not discussing our business interest issues, but it does dovetail into everything that we do, right? And taking a look at the diversity in our own groups and the people that we work with, and then having some conversations. And there's breakout sessions in that. But I'm actually really enjoying the program. Not all employees are finding it easy to talk about these things. I'll have to say for some of my colleagues, it's difficult.
Yeah.
For various reasons, right?
Right. One of the things too, because I've, been in workers' comp field even longer, since the early 80s. And so, and seen, like you have, many changes, in the workers' comp field over the years. And, and I know that you're aware of this. I'm not sure if all of our participants are, but that's one of the things I realized, even back in the 90s, so to speak, that there's a lot of attitude bias towards, even the term injured workers. That whole phrase is contrary to what the ADA set out to do in 1990, when they say, no, a person with a disability, a person with a medical condition, put the person first. You don't categorize or label them by that term. And yet workers' comp has still been pretty slow to change some of it.
All of our letters still have injured worker, or another one is claimant, also not very nice, not very friendly. The other one that's really not nice is applicant.
Yeah.
And we use that term as a term of litigation, that if you're represented, applicant, us being the defendant, right?
Yeah.
So employer and employee is much nicer. And I really like how Disney approaches it. It's team member. So if you work for them and you're hurt, you're a team member. So I really try with the claims staff, with my claims team that's pretty diverse. And obviously our employee base is very diverse. We try to work as a team, and I want them to treat the employees that are healing from injuries like family. That's how I want them treated. And that's how we approach the medical provider network too. I only want physicians on that medical provider network that I feel have a good bedside manner and that are going to treat for medical treatment and mental health treatment. They're going to treat our employees like we'd want our family members treated. So it's a little different. I guess my risk management philosophy and viewpoint is a little bit different, but our employees are coming to work for us and working for us for a long time, and they are our biggest asset, and they are the largest part of our budget. Our employees and benefits, salary and benefits, are the biggest part of any school district's budget. So they are our asset. So they do need to be taken care of. Was talking to a district the other day, and the question was phrased a little differently, but it was sort of like, how many injuries can an employee have before we need to have the conversation that you shouldn't be working here anymore? Is that number 3? Is it 5? Is it 7? We have employees that come to work for us for 20 and work for us until they're 70. We have an 80-year-old custodian that got hurt last week because I had to look at the new claim like 3 times to make sure I was reading the age right. So he's worked for us for 60 years. So that's our workforce, right? So of course you're going to have more than one injury if you work in any kind of laborious job over that time. So what I answered, because this was a person newer to their position, there is no number, and for everybody that's on this call, of course, there is no number. I don't even think in these terms of times that you can get hurt where you should no longer be working for us, because that would never be a conversation we would have in group health. How many illnesses can you have? If you have diabetes and then you get cancer, can you no longer work for us? That isn't the question that we should be asking, is can the person work safely with the limitations and the health issues that they have? But there's no number of claims when you could no longer be in your position or be working for us.
Right. I would like to add, because that's why I enjoy so much working for with the County Office of Education, because you do hold that philosophy, and you and I go back many years, so we have sort of grown on that direction together. But I do want our participants to be aware of, though, I actually do start looking at, how many injuries has this person had, and what kind of work did they do, and what is their age, and because under the Americans with Disabilities Act, that whole direct threat, reasonable accommodation is generally expected unless the person continuing to work faces risk for further injury or harm to self or to others. And so we had an employee that I was working with a couple times over the summer and into the fall, and relatively young guy, but had started working there when he was 19. But I think he was still in his 40s.
Maybe his only professional job, right?
Yes, absolutely. And he did have a specialized set of skills, but he did have a very high number of injuries compared to anybody else. And so I was like, what's going on here? And they certainly did their job of doing safety training and, best practices and all this kind of stuff. And So I played the heavy. It's, well, I have to admit, from my independent third-party perspective under the ADA, I'm real concerned what's going on here. You have had a lot of injuries, and so what's happening, so we can try to keep you working safely, and are you putting others at risk by these injuries happening? And so he got that. I wasn't trying to get rid of him, for his job or anything, but just to raise that, and we really need to take a look at that. And so he was not brought back to work at that point because he wasn't at maximum medical improvement, but we encouraged him to really have a serious conversation with his medical providers as far as, what he needed to consider. And what it turned out is that he realized that he was so eager to, help out, that he actually was pushing himself pretty hard, moved too quickly, didn't think ahead. And so that kind of mindset, sometimes, the people who do get injured the most are the ones who put in 110% because they just don't stop,
Right.
Yeah. And, but he was able to finally come back to work, and a much more improved mindset, shall we say.
And I agree with you that when we do see lots of injuries, lots of people even that I see on this call that are larger members, charters or school districts, they might have 5 injuries, 10 injuries, 11 injuries. And I agree with you. That's something where we start looking at, is it safe? And you and I know we've had lots of IPMs, even with the people on this call, where we've moved somebody out of one department and into another, into a less laborious job to help them. So that, is it safe, working with the limitations, just like if they had a non-industrial medical condition like cancer or MS. I guess I don't see the conversations. When I always talk to the districts, I always tell them, I don't really look at our employees that are injured on the job so differently than the group health medical injuries. Even though you don't get the same information about those injuries, you might get a note every now and again that they can't work with a boot, or you might get a note that it might not even say they have cancer, but what's the note that I saw recently? They couldn't work around a lot of people, right? Because of their immune system, right? They needed to be working either at home or away from people. This was even pre-COVID, I think, this note. But I look at the limitations in workers' comp very similar to group health, which I do notice that at the districts, they treat the employees with comp injuries very, very differently from the employees that have non-industrial health issues. I guess I don't think like this. I think that it's really about the medical conditions and the limitations and the work restrictions it creates, not the number of injuries, but understanding that with OSHA, we do have to provide a safe place to work. And then we even have the further safety issue of safety with the kids, right? Because we're responsible for the students that we're serving. So that's why when I talk to risk management, whether risk management lives in business services like it does at some of our charters and school districts, and in some it lives in HR. And I can see the reason for both of those. Wherever it lives, that person has to be really, I think you can have a business mind and a risk management and safety mind and still have a compassionate and kind mind. And the way that I approach employees, our team members that are hurt, that's the way I want the districts and the charters to approach. And I also want the claims team to communicate with them the same way, because that's what I told the claims team. That's why I don't like the word claimant, which is in all of our letters, because they're form letters from the state and they're not our letters. And they have a lot of mandatory language in them. And I really don't like applicant, right? What does that mean? That's horrible. That's a litigation term, right? But it's hard, I think, once you're trained and you're a claims examiner and you use this language, then, because what it does is it separates them. I think it creates 6 degrees of separation if you're not with us. And where I want, when you guys are working with, whether they're workers' comp or whether they're healthcare issues, I want the whole message is, I can help you. How can we help you? How can I help, right? How can we help make this transition smoother? How can we make coming back to work safer? That's more the top of mind. And how many injuries have you had? 3, 5, 6?
Yeah. And one of the things I'll share with our participants today too, is that we want to remind you, if you have a question, put it in the chat room. But the other thing is that I oftentimes say, while accommodation focuses on the individual employee, sometimes many times we can actually come up with changes in practice that benefit many. And so I use the opportunity, if we see some repeated injuries or a department that has a high rate of injuries, then to say, wait a minute, are there practices that are going on that really are not advantageous to an employee's health? And is there another way we can think about it? And I'll also share, and it sort of ties into the whole stress and anxiety thing, since I've been at this for a number of years, and particularly when I worked with the large power and water utility for many years, I could see this, is that if we saw a lot of injuries coming out of a certain department, it's like, that's indicative of something going on. And oftentimes it has to do with supervisory style. And then again, more of the old school kind of supervisor, bark and shout and do as I say, and just do it. That can really set up people. Being distracted, being treated poorly can actually predispose people for injury or illness. And so that sort of rolls over to our employee stress and anxiety. And so I'd like to hear more from you about that, Felicia, because we've been hearing that certainly on the news, but specifically, how does that apply to the school districts?
Yeah, and I really love, even right when COVID started, or right around that time, the county office paid for yoga instructors. So we have, if you can imagine, for all of our employees, anybody that wants to participate during their lunch hour on Tuesday and Thursday, we have yoga for an hour. And I have to say, even just as a general comment, but also as a user of this program, it's marvelous. And I was a yoga practitioner even before this, but the two instructors are wonderful. And what they did it for is to help with stress reduction, because those of us at the county office that are working at home, or whether we're kind of what I call a hybrid, some of us go in some days and then work at home some days, it really helps with the stress level. It's been incredible. And we also have some forums for discussion on surrounding once the racial unrest. And then the yoga instructor one day said, we're going to have a special very relaxation yoga today and meditation yoga today because of ES. So I was sitting there during my yoga class trying to figure out, what is ES? Because I know all the medical terms, and I thought, never heard of this, I have to look it up. Election stress. Oh. So, and it was after the election, but they were saying that there was so much going on that a lot of people were having free-floating anxiety. And that's what we've been seeing play out in our claims. It's been very interesting. We've been seeing a rise, and Mark alluded to it in our webinar earlier today on AB 685. We've been seeing a rise in stress claims, mental health claims, what we call psych stress claims. That's where there's no medical injury. Some of them are related to fear of getting COVID, fear of coming back to work. And some of them are related to maybe working remotely and feeling disconnected from not only their students, but also their colleagues and their coworkers. And so it has been an interesting time, because while my EASE MHN program isn't connected to work comp injuries at all, there's been a rise in usage there, but there's also what we're seeing is a rise in our psych stress claims throughout our charter schools and districts, and that can't be unrelated to all these things, right?
Right. I certainly have dealt with a number of underlying medical conditions related to COVID, and a couple that centered around anxiety. I mean, they did have real medical conditions, but it was more of their anxiety that was keeping them, they were afraid to return to work. And one approach I want to share with everybody today that seems to have been pretty successful is doing a graduated transition plan. And so one example is one employee was out for both childcare purposes as well as an underlying medical condition. She'd already used all the childcare provisions, or it was running out, I think, as of November 4th or 3rd, for 2nd, there we go. And so, as her doctor wanted her to stay out through the end of the year. and to sort of let COVID settle down. Well, now we know that probably isn't going to happen, but you know, back in, I think this was in early October, late September, you know, we were able to explain then is that, you know, this is the available leave you have, you know, access to, your sick leave and all this kind of stuff. And so there are financial consequences if you actually stay out till the end of the year. And, you know, and so that's your choice, and you can certainly do that, you know, but otherwise, you know, she was a public facing employee, and they'd already accommodated her beyond everybody else being off of work and using advantage of these leaves. So what we were able to do, once I understood sort of her underlying concern, we built a transition plan of where she came back the next week, 1 day a week, and then she added another day a week, and then a third day a week. And so finally, by the end of her leave, she was actually back full time. And I just did a follow-up on that earlier last week, and she's doing well, and so she was able to see where all the protocols have been put into place, you know, the plexiglass and so forth. And it turned out there was actually a spare office that she could further isolate and yet still see access to the lobby. So yeah, it was very successful. You know, and we've done that in a few other settings that have been very good. One actually wasn't proving effective. The employee didn't have any problem with it, but clearly the school district did. And so we were able to modify it. And but we still kept within the 120 days of temporary accommodation. So this is where we're still using our existing guidelines. You know, what's the school district policy? And I will just share with everybody here at the federal level, the EEOC does say that indefinite, undefined leaves of absence are not accommodatable. And so if someone says, well, you know, must remain, you know, remote working indefinitely, it's like, well, that's not okay, you know. And so the interactive process gives us a chance to explain all these different things. But the EEOC has said, you know, if you've met your 120 days, if that's your model, a max, and then someone says, I might, you know, I need 30 more days or I need 60 more days, the EEOC has actually ruled that that would be a permissible extension of an accommodation process, and would be defensible. If you tried not to do it, I think it was UPS that got slammed pretty hard for not doing a defined extension for 30 days. And so they lost big time money. If anybody's taken my classes, they've seen those lawsuits I've presented as far as the consequences. We do have a question. Workers' comp resources for Boulder Company. My company merged with a Colorado company, and I've been tasked with workers' compensation process. I'm not sure, Felicia, do you have any suggestions? I'm not sure I would. I'm not familiar with Colorado.
Oh, so we need some resources in Colorado?
Yeah.
Well, I'll just give an example if it's helpful. We had one of our risk managers at a very large member school district of ours moved to, where's Breaking Bad filmed? New Mexico, Albuquerque.
Okay.
Thank you. I'll think of it. And he was going to work at the Albuquerque, New Mexico schools. And so I went online and downloaded their workers' comp labor code, which was a pamphlet. It was this big. But I copied it all out and had a horse rider on the front. It was very exciting. Our labor code, to give you an example, in California is 6 inches thick, and you couldn't print it out. It's so big. But that's what I gave him as his going away present that he could read on the airplane. I don't know how appreciated it was. But I copied out the labor code, and then it had all of their rules and regulations and all of the way they administrate their claims, because New Mexico is completely different than California. So that would be my recommendation, is go to Colorado's labor code, and I'm sure they have resources online or summaries online, and then you can even download and print or purchase if you really want to read. But you should have the labor code of any state that you're administrating, because all states have their own workers' compensation laws and that are very unique to themselves. California being one of the most difficult, that's why our labor code is this big, and New Mexico's is literally, I think it was 25 pages. I told him you could read it on the plane, and because if you can do California, you pretty much, I just want to tell the person, if you can do California, you can do Colorado, because California is the most complicated system. So you sort of jumped into the fire, and then once you read the other states, they usually get a little bit easier.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that too, is that yeah, each and every state is very, very different. And, Colorado's pretty progressive. And so, like you said, California is the most complex. And so Colorado won't be as easy as New Mexico, but they won't probably be as difficult as California.
Might be this big.
Yeah.
Somewhere in between.
Yeah. And I'll try to think about it, because I think I know somebody who either came from Colorado or who has moved to Colorado and working in that area. But another resource that I would put out there, you might want to contact the Disability Management Employers Coalition, DMEC, because they are throughout the country now. They actually were founded right here in San Diego back in the 80s, I think it was. Yeah, late 80s. And but now they're nationwide, and one of the I think anyway, one of the tops in terms of, really informed people and excellent programs and stuff like that. But you could probably reach out to the DMEC and find out, their Colorado chapters, and maybe make connections with them too. That would be another resource in addition to the labor code.
And I wanted to add something. I had a thought when you were speaking. The two things that I have seen intersecting that are causing a lot of need for what I call non-industrial IPMs due to COVID, there's a couple things that are happening. Some districts decided they weren't bringing students back for in-classroom instruction, but employees, meaning teachers, certificated teachers, and IAs needed to come back. And then they had some cohorts that were there in school, but they were Zooming from school. There were quite a few of our districts that required that. That caused a lot of IPMs, because a lot of people were like, no, I'm going to stay at home. I can't do that for numerous reasons. So that caused a lot of discussion about return to work and whether or not it could be done gradually. One of the notes that one of the school districts, and they're not on this right now, but I can use the example. The note said can work a few days a week as needed. Can you imagine? This is a certificated teacher. The school district said what days is that? How many days is that? To your point. So what the doctor was trying to say in the note, you and I know what he was saying. They can't work like a full week. I'd like them to just be there. How much? Didn't even say. And so when the district got the note and had the IPM, they said, and I think this is one of the ones they're going to be doing with you, but that was the thing they said to her was, we can't accommodate this. We don't even know what this is. And there's no way that you can just call out sick. She just wanted to be able to call out sick a couple days a week and work at home. And they said, no, that's not going to work. Nobody can do that. How could we accommodate that? We don't even know what that is. And so they, through conversation and continual discussion, then she did agree to come back to work. But you're right, it was the fear and anxiety, to your point, of coming in and Zooming. She'd been Zooming from home, which was just fine with her, but she didn't want to come there. And then they were getting ready to, before we went purple, they were getting ready to open for hybrid in-person instruction. They said, we're not going to have kids in your classroom 5 days a week, the whole regular schedule. It's going to be a hybrid schedule, but it's going to be our schedule. It's not going to be your schedule. And you're not going to be able to dictate that you don't come to work a couple days a week. We won't agree to that. And she found that very egregious. And then there was more conversation. But it has been interesting that, and in some of these cases, they haven't been able to come to a compromise, and the person has had to stay home, and they got a sub, and they use their leave, to your point, and they're using the COVID leave, and if it applies, and they're using some other leaves applicable. But I always tell them, when you're having this conversation, really lay out, this is how many weeks this leave you have. This is how many weeks you have of sick leave. This is how many weeks you have of extended sick, and this is when things run out. Because a lot of employees don't actually understand what they have and what the progression of that is, and especially that they could be docked, that you could be in a sub-pay dock, or that you could be getting actually half of your pay, which most people can't live on. Some people can, and they can go on half pay and stay out. And so I think a real reality check of what does that mean exactly if you're not going to be able to come in for in-person instruction, and you're not going to be able to do a hybrid, even part-time schedule. What does that mean if leave is the accommodation? Which I'm sure you've run into that too.
Yeah, and I think this is where, again, how we approach the conversation, just like we were talking about the conversations around diversity and equity, is really important. Because if you've ever had a medical condition yourself, and I imagine many of us have, it's frightening. You don't know what to expect and how long is this going to last and how is my livelihood impacted. And I have to admit, early in the 90s, I had a medical condition that took me out of work a couple months earlier, and I really, not that I didn't already, but I really, I guess learned to appreciate just the difficulty that employees with medical conditions and work-related injuries go through, because you are isolated. And so, there is real fear there. And so, rather than having I'll call it a knee-jerk reaction to say, no, we can't do that. It's like, well, wait a minute, not that you can do it, but let's have a conversation with the employee and understand where they're coming from so we can be realistic in mapping out the options that may be available. And I know from my experience in working with a lot of school districts over the fall with COVID-19, for a lot of reasons, I always start off with, this is, unprecedented times, and we have all kinds of unknowns, but we still have to make plans. We need to have plans in order to guide us and shape us. And so, for the most part, school districts have been fairly flexible, or say they will be through the end of this calendar year, but that the expectation is, we'll continue working with you for now, or maybe we can't, or let's get you back in the regular groove of things before Christmas break, so you can have a feel for that. But the expectation is that come January, we'll be working, regularly. And so again, it's real important that we be creative and flexible. I just did one last week where the employee was usually an on-site classroom teacher, and due to her condition, and she's of course been working remotely, but because the school's district distance learning program that they had already in existence had, more than quadrupled. It went from 45 to 60 students to 800, so they have a need for distance learning teachers, and they actually, had asked people to volunteer. They didn't have enough volunteers, but so anyway, this teacher was able to continue teaching distance learning, but we had to be very clear that this was not a guarantee. As long as the demand was up, there would be a position, and because she was an employee with a medical condition, she would sort of have, first option to accept any opening position as a result of her disability. But again, it wasn't guaranteed. So we put that out there, and it's in writing, and so she can't come back and say, well, you gave me this job forever. It's like, no, so those are the values of having an IPM around some of these kinds of situations.
Yeah, I like that, not guaranteed forever.
Yeah.
Because that is sometimes what the employees hear when you're in the conversation. So I think it's so careful to not set expectations that are unrealistic. One of the districts I know was being very creative, and they had an employee who had concerns about an underlying health condition and didn't want to come back, and they are already back in a hybrid schedule with certain cohorts are in-person learning. And this particular individual said, well, I happen to know that there's 2 openings for distance learning only teachers. Can I move from my classroom? You can sub my classroom temporarily, and can I move over to the distance learning only? And then what I told the districts is, I said, whether you meet on your own or whether you use Dr. Dupree to do this meeting, you want to be very clear that if you're moving her over, and this distance learning she was moving over was some created positions for the parents of students that were not going to be coming back to school, and that we're going to only work in this distance only environment, because some schools have about 75, 25, 80, 20, 25% of the parents aren't going to send their kids back for the in-person instruction. So they had 2 distance only learning positions, and they gave her one of them, and then they subbed her class, but then they were very clear with her, this is not forever, this is not your new forever job. We're doing this for now during COVID, and then we'll reassess this. And I told them, and I don't know if you encourage like setting a time frame on that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very important too, because our conditions under COVID are changing so much that, what we have in place today may not be what we have in place in January, and I mean, look how fast things changed even last week, and the impact that had. Yeah. And one of the things too I found is that, again, I've had a couple where the employees think work from home is just working out fine for them, and then
they really like it.
Oh yeah, they do, but again, in one position, I mean, it was an executive assistant, if that's the right title, to an assistant superintendent. And so from her perspective, she said, I'm doing all the work. And as we went through the essential functions, and, I always, ask the person in charge, and that's why I like to have a supervisor or assistant superintendent there, will give an overview of how the department runs, how many people are there, what does this, aside from the job, essential functions, how does the job serve? And so the very purpose was to serve the assistant superintendent. And there was a whole lot of stuff the assistant superintendent was having to do that was really part of the assistant's job. And so it was like, well, this may work for you, but this isn't working for her. And so, unfortunately, I think that was still under advisement as far as how we're proceeding, because she clearly had some respiratory conditions unrelated to COVID. And so there were some risks, but at the same time, she wasn't getting done all of the essential functions of her job, and was pretty resistant to considering any transitional plans or anything like that. And so that was still being determined, shall we say. Yeah. You mentioned too that some teachers doing distance learning are doing it from their homes too, which has sort of been accepted during this transition phase. But my experience is that most of the school districts, at least that I've worked with, would like to see those distance learning teachers also teach from the school site, because then they have access to all the resources and better technology
resources, right, that are available there.
Yeah. So we do have another question. Let's see. Okay, I'll get back to that one here. Okay, well, maybe Felicia, you can address this. What's the guidance on employees working remotely who report a positive case?
So I get a lot of questions about this, about whether or not under SB 1159, if they need to report a positive case, if the employee is only working at home, and the answer is no. There's no way they could have exposed any employees if they're only working at home. And the answer really would be the same for AB 685. You don't need to notify any employees of a potential positive COVID employee if they are only working at home. We're really talking about people who are coming on site for any length of time, right, and being exposed. And it's kind of why when the county office set up our cohorts for our testing for 50% of our employees at a time, if you do not come onto our campus, because we had a lot of discussion about this with our HR department, you do not need to be tested for the 50%, even if you're a teacher, if you are only working at home. But like myself, I need to come onto campus sometimes to pick up things. I need to sign checks sometimes. Now I'm just usually walking in, doing something and walking out. I don't usually stay there and work. Doesn't matter. I have to be tested for the every other month 50%. So because when I'm walking in, of course I'm masking and I have my temperature checked at the front like everyone. Mm-hmm. And of course I'm staying 6 feet away, and I never take my mask off when I'm at the county office. But even still, I'm walking around, right? And I am in the building, and there are a few other people in our building, in our room that are working. And so because of that, that's why there's potential exposure. So no, if somebody is only working at home, they don't even need to be included in the 50% testing.
Okay.
They don't need to be reported in any case.
Okay, so just to clarify, then they do not go through the workers' comp system, even though they're working, but they're not getting any exposure from direct work site.
So that's for COVID. I have had a lot of questions because there's apparently a lot of confusion. Somebody fell down their stairs during their working hours, carrying something downstairs for a Zoom meeting, or I don't know what they were doing. It wouldn't have mattered. It is during their working hours, and they broke their ankle.
Mm.
And so the district sent them to group health. They said, what are you talking about? And I said, no, that's workers' comp. And they were shocked. We had a big conversation and I said, what is the difference if my hours are 8 to 5, whether I am at the county office or whether I'm here, and if I was uncoordinated enough and I fell off my chair and I hurt myself, I would absolutely be covered for workers' comp. But I have talked to several districts who the disconnect is there, right? No, you need to be on site in order to be hurt. Okay, that's COVID exposure. You need to be on site because that's the only way you could have been exposed at work. Otherwise, it is non-industrial exposure to COVID. But when you're working at home, and that's why on our telecommuting agreements at the county office, we all have to put our working hours. And you know why? If I did fall and break my ankle at 8 p.m., then I would not be covered.
Yeah.
But if it's in the middle of my day, even if I'm getting up to go get a snack and a drink, and I fall down and I hit my head, I'm covered. And it's interesting how much conversation we've had with the districts where they're shocked because they had no idea.
Yeah.
Case.
Yeah, it is certainly a twist on the mindset, right? In terms of, yeah. Okay, very interesting, very interesting. So when you talk about any other suggestions as far as how to mitigate some of these things, I know we both have given some examples so far, but any other things that you've been encountering that might be helpful for our participants?
I think that one of the directives that we've been trying to do at the county office, and I'm sure everyone's doing it at the charters in the schools, we have a management Zoom once a week. That's just with our managers. And then we have an all staff Zoom. That's hard for school districts. That's just our department, but it's quite a few people. That's 40 or 50 people. And we do that once a week. So the managers get together once a week and the staff get together once a week. Even if there isn't anything specifically on the agenda, we will discuss things that are going on, but you know why we're doing that. We're just doing that to check in and make sure everybody feels included. See how everybody's doing, talk about vacations. I think that even more than normal, and then I obviously check in with my staff pretty regularly because we're not working physically together. My department, only a few people are coming in on certain days. So we're all not working together in the way that we normally do. Then I think you don't have to have yoga twice a week for all your employees. Obviously that's a very nice, they pay for that. They pay for the instructors, and SDCOE has the Zoom meeting and sends it out to all employees. So I'm certainly not saying everybody has to do that, but I think doing more to help the mental health framework of the employees is top of mind because we know now that it could be until next summer, until the end of closer to next year, right? Before we look more like pre-COVID. So we know that it's a long time and it's taking a toll on people's psyche.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other suggestions? You talked about the yoga classes. I know I've talked to you before about my I call it the 4x6 breathing method. Breathing deeply 6 times a day, but four deep breaths throughout the day. Because then if you measure it out, when you get up at 6, let's say, then at 9, 12, 3, 6, and then going to bed again, that's 6 times. But you are, by that deep breathing, you're deliberately slowing down your heart rate, you're expanding your lungs, you're actually getting more oxygen to the brain, and just sort of, it's like I call it a little mini internal massage of your organs, and how that deep breathing can really help you manage throughout the day. And recognizing if your fear is, the what ifs of the world, we all need to ask the question, what if, once in a while, but if we get too caught up in what if this happens, what if this happens, we're sort of driving our anxiety right there too. So any other suggestions that you might have as far as how our participants can help people calm?
Well, it's interesting because we're at the county office, we're not allowed to accumulate too much vacation. And last year they sort of let that go with COVID. They sort of said, okay, if you have too much vacation, we're just not going to make it an issue and you can just roll it over. This year, it's very interesting. They've taken a different tack. They're like, no, we want you to use your vacation. But it's difficult now with the travel advisory that went into effect on Friday, where we're not supposed to be really moving around a lot without self-quarantining. But the one thing they noticed at the county office is that people stopped taking their vacation, right? Because there's nowhere to go, and so they weren't taking any time off, and they've just been working. And then we have COVID, but then we have like these 2 new laws that adds a lot of workload. That's like more workload onto people's desks, right? So reporting the positive COVID cases is somebody's actual job now, and then what's going to become somebody's job is reporting any positive COVID or people that need to be quarantined, sending out these letters, these notice letters. That's going to become somebody's job. So these things are kind of stressful. So the one thing I think that our HR department said was that you really do need to still schedule your vacation and your time off, which a lot of people have not been doing. And then they have tons and tons of vacation that's being accumulated because of that. And so I noticed this year, they said no more on the waiver. If you do not take your vacation, we can only accumulate so many hours, you're going to lose it on June 30. But you know why they did that? They're trying to force people to take time off, especially during the holidays and when things hopefully will slow down a bit, to help with that mental health issue rather than just working all the time.
Yeah. Well, Felicia, I think we've touched on all the places that we wanted to touch on. Any final remarks before we wrap up our program for today?
I think it's just very important to be patient and kind with yourself. I think that I think the one thing I notice is just trying to be as helpful as you can to your staff and your employees, and understanding that these are unprecedented times. So I always tell the claims team, everybody gets a little bit of a gimme right now. We're pretty strict normally about attending your appointments, about not missing any surgeries, about the rules. We have a lot of rules in workers' comp. I'm not saying by any means throw the rules out the window. I just said we have to look at things in a kinder, gentler way because of COVID. And that's the lens that I try to look at everything through right now.
Yeah. Well, you remind me of one of my favorite sayings from Stephen Covey, who wrote the book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So it's a great read if you haven't read it. It actually comes out of the 1980s, but gets a lot of attention these days because of the neuroscience we understand behind human behavior now. And just, how we operate in the work world today is very different than 20 years ago. But he one of his, I think it's the 5th habit, seek first to understand before you seek to be understood. And so I share that a lot with people, because you want to find out where are people coming from first. What are their fears? What are their concerns? And to acknowledge that, because when people don't feel heard, then that's when they start to fight back. And so so it is really important to listen to where people are coming from, what their fears are, what their concerns are, having those more challenging conversations like you were talking about with the diversity and equity. This is just another layer of diversity in my mind. People with medical conditions, and people have a lot of, as we can see from the political times of recent, people have a lot of different ideas about, what's going on and their believability of it, and in some places of the country more than others. So, but yeah, we've got a long way to go, baby. And we've come a long way, but we've got a long way to go. And now, as we know too, is that this is going to extend into 2021 and hopefully not too far beyond. So it's good news today about a couple of the
vaccine news is very exciting, super exciting, right? Moderna, I think it's 94% effective, and the Pfizer is 90% effective. That means the clinical 3 trials they're getting some really positive results. So
so there's light on the horizon. So well, thank you again, Felicia, for joining me for our Monday Q&A. And it's always delightful to see you and talk with you, and I learned so much. And thank you to all of our participants for being here. Check in the chat box, and I don't have anything more. Just so our participants know, is that the program has been recorded, and we will send the recording out to you. I believe it's usually within about 24 hours or so, but at least sometime within the next couple of days. And invite you to join us and pre-register for our upcoming ones too, because we do plan this once a month, and we take a look at what kinds of topics are happening, and so trying to keep us all on top of things and be supportive to one another as we work in our more isolated worlds. So thank you all.
Be safe.
Yep, be safe. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay positive.